I never imagined motherhood could feel so lonely while sharing the same roof with your child. But that's exactly what my life had become. A silent, aching coexistence between me and my son. Ethan, I used to think the bond between a mother and her child was unbreakable. That love could survive anything. Even heartbreak. Even abandonment. But I was wrong. It turns out love doesn't vanish overnight. It just fades so quietly that by the time you realize it's gone, you can't remember when it started slipping away. Ethan was 17 now, tall, quiet and moody in that teenage way that made him both a mystery and a heartbreak to me. He used to be my little boy, always following me around the kitchen, asking endless questions, wanting bedtime stories even when he was too old for them. But lately, he'd turned into a stranger. He avoided me, barely spoke unless necessary, and whenever we did talk, there was this sharp edge in his voice, like everything I said was wrong. Everything I did annoyed him. I kept telling myself it was just a phase. Teenagers drift, they come back. But deep inside, I knew it was something else. Something heavier, colder, like a wall between us that neither of us built intentionally, but somehow ended up trapped behind. I think it all began after his father, Daniel, left us. That day is etched into my memory with the kind of clarity that still hurts when I think about it. It was raining. I remember standing by the kitchen counter, my hands still wet from washing dishes, watching him throw clothes into a suitcase. He didn't yell. He didn't even argue. He just said he needed to find himself. Those were his exact words. Find himself. As if what we had, me, Ethan, this home, had been nothing but a distraction from the man he was trying to be. Ethan stood at the door that day, gripping the edge of his father's jacket, eyes full of questions he didn't dare to ask. And Daniel, God, I'll never forget this, kissed Ethan on the forehead and said, "I'll come back when things make sense." They never did. After that, Ethan stopped being a child overnight. He stopped asking questions, stopped laughing, stopped looking me in the eye. He'd lock himself in his room for hours, music blaring, or go out without telling me where. At first I blamed Daniel, then I blamed myself. Then I stopped blaming anyone and just accepted the silence. For a while, I thought we were doing okay, surviving at least. I worked long hours at the clinic, and Ethan stayed busy with school and friends. We had a routine. I'd make dinner, he'd eat quickly, mumble a thanks, and disappear again. It wasn't perfect, but it was predictable. Until little things started to change. One morning, I noticed a few missing bills from my purse. It wasn't much, maybe $20 or $30, but it happened again the next week. And then again, I thought maybe I'd misplaced them or forgotten I'd spent it. But something in my gut told me otherwise. Then, one afternoon while cleaning my room, I realized one of my gold bracelets was gone. It wasn't valuable, at least not in money, but it had belonged to my mother. I asked Ethan about it, but he shrugged and said he hadn't seen it. His tone was defensive, almost irritated that I'd even asked. That was the first time I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, and I couldn't shake it off. But what could I do? He was my son. My only family is left. I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe I'd misplaced the bracelet myself, that maybe I was turning into the kind of paranoid mother I'd promised I'd never be. Then there was that one evening when I came home early from work. The house was dark except for a faint glow seeping from under Ethan's door. I heard him talking to someone. A girl's voice, soft and uncertain. My heart jumped. I wasn't even sure why. I stood there listening. "Don't worry," I heard him whisper. "She doesn't know anything." My hand froze on the doorknob. I wanted to open it, but something stopped me. Maybe fear. Shame. I didn't want to be that parent who pried, who spied. So I quietly stepped back and pretended I'd heard nothing. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of my son's face, the tone of his voice, it haunted me. There was something secretive about it. Something fragile, almost desperate. Days turned into weeks. The distance between us grew wider. He'd come home late, avoid eye contact, and lock his door faster than I could ask how his day was. I thought of confronting him so many times, but I didn't know how to start. What if I pushed too hard and he pulled away completely? Then one Saturday morning, while dusting the living room shelves, I found something that stopped me in my tracks. An old nanny camera. It was small and dusty, hidden behind a photo frame of us from when Ethan was 5. I'd used it back when he was little, mostly for fun. It hadn't worked in years. The battery had died, and I'd never bothered fixing it. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, smiling bitterly at how time had flown. There we were in the photo beside it, Ethan with chocolate smeared on his face, me laughing behind him, Daniel taking the picture. We looked like a family back then. A real one. Without thinking much, I plugged the camera into the wall. The tiny red light flickered to life. I couldn't believe it still worked. Out of curiosity, I downloaded the old app on my phone and reconnected it to our Wi-Fi. Within seconds, the image popped up. The same living room I was standing in, slightly distorted from the old lens but functional. I smiled to myself, shaking my head. It felt strange, like finding a piece of the past I hadn't meant to uncover. I told myself it might be useful, just in case of a break-in or something. That was the excuse I gave myself. Deep down, maybe I wanted to know what happened in this house when I wasn't looking, but I didn't tell Ethan. I didn't even think it mattered. That night, I went to bed early. I left my phone on the nightstand and the camera quietly connected. I forgot about it completely. Over the next few days, life carried on as usual, or as usual as it could be in our broken little world. Ethan went to school, came home late, and ate in silence. I went to work, pretended to smile at patients, and came home exhausted. We barely spoke. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me like he wanted to say something, but the words would never come. Other times he'd vanish into his room for hours, and I'd hear muffled laughter through the door, that same girl's voice, faint and haunting. There were moments when I'd stand outside his door, listening, waiting, wondering if I should knock. But something in me always stopped. Maybe pride, maybe fear. Maybe the exhaustion of trying to fix something that didn't want to be fixed. It was a Thursday night when the feeling of unease became unbearable. I was sitting on the couch, the TV on, but my mind elsewhere. There was this constant knot in my chest, the kind of anxiety that doesn't have a clear cause, only a presence. I scrolled through my phone mindlessly, checking messages, bills, anything to distract myself. That's when I noticed the camera app was still installed. For a brief moment, I wondered if it was even still connected. I hadn't opened it since the day I set it up. So without thinking much, I tapped the icon. The screen came alive instantly. A grainy, live view of the living room. Nothing unusual. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the empty couch, the dim light. It was past midnight after all. I watched for a few seconds, then locked my phone. I don't know why I did it. Maybe out of habit, maybe instinct. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself to stop being paranoid, but somewhere deep inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing, that this quiet tension in the house was just the calm before a storm. The next few days felt heavier. Ethan became even more secretive. He'd take longer showers, leave earlier, and avoid eye contact completely. I noticed him sneaking glances at me like he was hiding something, and that look, that guilt, tore through me. Still, I said nothing. I cooked his favorite meals, waited for him at dinner, and tried to start conversations. All met with silence. One night, when I asked if everything was okay, he snapped, his voice sharp, angry, defensive. "Stop treating me like a kid, Mom. I'm fine." He stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him. The echo of that door haunted me long after he was gone. I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at his untouched plate. That's when I realized how far we'd drifted. My own son, the boy I'd raised, the boy I'd held when he had nightmares, was now a stranger who couldn't even sit through dinner with me. I stayed up late that night, restless. I wandered through the living room, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning. The house felt so empty it almost had an echo. Then I noticed the little red light on the nanny cam blinking faintly from behind the photo frame. It was still on. Still recording. For a moment, I thought about unplugging it. What was the point? But then something in me whispered, leave it. Maybe I didn't want to see what was wrong because I was afraid of confirming what I already suspected, that something was wrong. So I left it on. And as I walked up the stairs to bed, I didn't realize I was walking straight toward the night that would change everything. The following Sunday, I woke up earlier than usual. It was raining, just like the day Daniel left. The smell of wet earth seeped through the open window, and for some reason I felt uneasy. I went downstairs to make coffee, scrolling absent-mindedly through my phone. That's when I saw it. A tiny notification at the top of the screen. Motion detected. Living room camera. I frowned. It was 10:47 p.m. the previous night. I hadn't been awake then. Curiosity tugged at me. My thumb hovered over the notification for a moment before I tapped it. The app opened. The footage began to play. At first, it was nothing. Just darkness. The faint glow from the TV screen reflecting on the wall. Then movement. Ethan walked into frame. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder like someone was following him. My heart started pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. He wasn't alone. A girl appeared behind him, young, maybe 16 or 17. Her hair was damp from the rain. She looked around nervously, and then Ethan did something that made my blood run cold. He reached under the couch cushion and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to her. She opened it. Inside was money. My money. The footage froze on my screen for a second as the Wi-Fi lagged. But that image, my son secretly handing cash to a stranger, burned into my mind like a scar. I didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything in my life was about to unravel. I sat on the edge of my bed, my phone glowing in the dark, the little spinning circle loading the camera feed. I could hear the rain tapping against the window, soft but steady, like a heartbeat that wouldn't calm down. My hands were shaking, but I didn't know why. Maybe it was the curiosity, maybe the fear that I was about to see something I wasn't ready for. The footage began. The timestamp read 10:47 p.m. The living room was dimly lit, the TV screen flickering faintly across the furniture. At first, everything seemed ordinary. The quiet kind of ordinary that fills the house at night when you think everyone's asleep. But then Ethan walked into the frame. He wasn't the same confident boy I used to know. He looked nervous, his movements quick and restless. He ran a hand through his hair, looked over his shoulder twice, then started pacing back and forth in front of the couch. My stomach tightened. Why was he acting like that? Then the front door opened, just slightly, and a shadow slipped inside. It was a girl. She looked young, maybe 16, 17 at most. Her dark hair was tied up in a messy bun, and her clothes were drenched from the rain. She closed the door gently behind her, like she didn't want anyone to hear. Ethan hurried over to her, whispering something I couldn't make out. I leaned closer to my phone, my heart thudding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Ethan grabbed a towel from the couch and handed it to her. She smiled, faintly, the kind of smile you give someone you trust. Then he pulled the couch cushion up and reached underneath. When he stood back up, he was holding a small brown envelope. I didn't even need to see what was inside. I knew money. He gave it to her without hesitation. She took it, opened it, and started counting. My hands went cold. I paused the video and stared at the screen. It couldn't be. My mind raced with every possible explanation. Maybe it wasn't my money. Maybe it was something else. But no, I recognized that envelope. I had one just like it in my drawer. The one I used to keep spare cash for groceries and emergencies. My throat tightened. I pressed play again. The girl finished counting and slipped the envelope into her jacket. Then she looked up at him and said something that made my stomach twist. "You're sure your mom won't find out? She'd never help me if she knew who I was." Her voice was soft, but trembling. Ethan lowered his head, his face falling into shadows. "She doesn't have to know. Mia, you're my sister." My breath caught. The world around me seemed to tilt, my vision blurring. Sister? I thought I'd misheard him. My heart was pounding so fast I could barely breathe. I rewound the footage. Watched again. Slower. She doesn't have to know, Mia. You're my sister. No. No. That couldn't be right. He couldn't mean that, Mia. But deep down, I knew. Daniel. The man who walked out on us 2 years ago. The man who promised to come back when things made sense. The man who built a new life while I picked up the pieces of the old one. He had another daughter, younger with another woman. I'd heard about her once, through mutual friends. I never asked questions. I didn't want to know. That was his new family, not mine. I told myself it was none of my business. And yet there she was, in my house, taking money from my son. I couldn't look away. I watched as Ethan sat beside her, rubbing his palms together like he was trying to keep calm. She's getting worse, the girl said. Dad said he'd send something, but he hasn't. Mom's been crying every night. Ethan nodded. I tried messaging him, but he doesn't reply to me either. He sounded broken. I'd never heard that tone in his voice before. Not anger, not defiance, just raw helplessness. I'll keep helping, he said finally. I'll find a way. Don't tell anyone, okay? Especially not Mom. She'd lose it. Mia bit her lip. She hates me, doesn't she? Ethan hesitated. She doesn't even know you, but yeah. I think she hates what you represent. My chest tightened so painfully that I had to put the phone down for a moment. I buried my face in my hands and let out a quiet, strangled breath. He was right. I had hated the idea of her. Not because she was at fault, but because she reminded me of everything I'd lost, of the betrayal that shattered us. Daniel had replaced us like we were disposable. And that little girl was proof that my family was never enough for him, but I had never, not once, thought of what it meant for Ethan. I picked up the phone again. The video was still playing. Mia was leaning on his shoulder, crying quietly. Ethan wrapped his arm around her. It's okay, he whispered. I'll fix this. I promise, he didn't sound like a liar. He sounded like a boy trying to heal the wounds his father left behind. I watched them for minutes. Maybe hours. I don't even know anymore. When the girl finally stood up to leave, Ethan handed her his jacket. She protested, but he insisted. He even opened the door for her, looking around to make sure no one saw. When the door closed behind her, he just stood there for a long time, staring at the space she left. Then he walked to the couch, sat down, and buried his face in his hands. I paused the video and stared at the screen. My hands were trembling uncontrollably. I wanted to scream at him to ask why. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't he trust me? Why does he think I'd hate her, hate him? But I already knew the answer, because I had made it too clear, with my bitterness, my anger, my silence, that Daniel's betrayal had poisoned everything around me. I'd never said it outright, but Ethan had felt it. Every time I referred to them, Daniel and his new family, my voice dripped with resentment. Every time Ethan mentioned his father, I shut him down. I told him not to talk about that man. I thought I was protecting him. But maybe all I did was drive him away. The irony stung. I'd spent so long trying to protect Ethan from pain, only to become the source of it. I replayed parts of the video again and again. The way Ethan's shoulders tensed when Mia mentioned Daniel. The way he looked ashamed, like he was betraying me just by helping her. The way he hid the envelope, carefully not to leave a trace. That was the part that broke me. He wasn't stealing for himself. He wasn't buying gadgets or hiding addictions. He was just trying to help. The tears came slowly at first, then all at once. I didn't even realize I was crying until the screen blurred and I couldn't see anymore. I wiped my face, but the sobs kept coming, quiet, raw, uncontrollable. I wasn't crying because he'd taken money. I was crying because I had failed him. I thought about all the times I'd scolded him for being cold, for not talking to me, for shutting himself away. I thought about the dinners we spent in silence, the countless chances I had to ask if he was okay, and didn't. I thought about the night I found him crying alone in his room after Daniel left. and how I just closed the door thinking he needed space. Maybe what he needed was me. The rest of that night felt endless. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the paused image of Ethan on the screen, his head buried in his hands, shoulders trembling slightly, all alone in the living room. Every few minutes, I'd think about confronting him, but then another thought would stop me. What would I even say? Would I yell? Cry? Hug him? I didn't know. By the time the sun started rising, I felt hollow. The light crept into the room slowly, washing everything in pale gray. My phone battery had died hours ago, but the image was still burned into my mind. I walked downstairs like a ghost. The living room was exactly as it had been in the footage. The same couch, the same cushion, the same air heavy with unspoken things. I stood there for a while, looking at the spot where he'd sat, trying to imagine what was going through his mind that night. There was something surreal about seeing reality and memory blur together like that. On the coffee table, a small corner of paper was sticking out from under the couch cushion. My heart jumped. I walked over and pulled it out. It was a folded grocery list. On the back of it, Ethan's handwriting. $60 for Mia, next week. My chest ached. It was confirmation. Painful, undeniable. I sank onto the couch and stared at the note. My hands trembled as I ran my fingers over the ink, over his messy handwriting that I'd once scolded him for in school. My mind filled with images. Ethan as a little boy, grinning after scoring a goal, holding my hand at the park, asking if I'd always love him even if he messes up. And here I was, realizing he'd been carrying my disappointment like a punishment all along. I pressed the note to my chest and closed my eyes. The morning passed quietly. Ethan didn't wake up until late. When he finally came downstairs, he looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. He mumbled a morning and poured himself cereal. I stood in the doorway watching him, trying to decide whether to say something, but I didn't. Not yet. He was still my boy, just older, hurting in ways I hadn't seen. And I wasn't ready to confront him while my own heart was still breaking. So I waited. All day, I went through the motions, work calls, dishes, errands, but I wasn't really there. My thoughts kept circling back to that footage, those words, that face. Every sound in the house made me glance toward him. Every silence between us felt heavier than before. When night came, I sat by the window again, staring at the rain. My phone was beside me, the screen black. I didn't want to open the footage again, but I couldn't stop thinking about it either. I thought about Mia, that quiet, frightened girl who shouldn't have to pay for her father's mistakes. And Ethan, my son, is trying to be the bridge between two broken families. Maybe that's what Daniel had left behind. Not love, not peace, but two children forced to heal wounds they didn't create. Somewhere between guilt and heartbreak, I made a decision. I would talk to Ethan, not as a judge, not as an angry mother, but as a woman who finally understood. I didn't know what I would say or how it would go. But I knew one thing for sure. The camera had shown me the truth. A truth I'd been blind to for too long, and once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. That night, I turned the camera off. For the first time in years, I didn't need it to tell me what was happening in my own home. I already knew. The morning came heavy and slow, the kind of morning that feels older than the day itself, the air thick with everything unsaid. Sunlight spilled through the blinds, striping the kitchen walls in soft gold, but nothing about that light felt warm. My stomach was in knots. The coffee machine hummed quietly, the scent filling the room, but I barely tasted it. My hands trembled as I set down the mug. I kept replaying that footage in my head, like a song I couldn't turn off. Ethan's face, his trembling voice, the envelope, the girl, Mia. Every frame had burned itself into my memory. I hadn't slept a minute. All night I'd gone back and forth between anger, heartbreak, guilt, and something else I couldn't quite name. Maybe shame. Shame that I'd needed a camera to remind me who my son really was. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled me out of my thoughts. Ethan's door opened slowly and hesitantly. I didn't even have to look up to know it was him. The faint shuffle of his slippers, the soft thud of his phone being tucked into his pocket. He walked into the kitchen with that tired teenage slouch that made him look older than 17. His hair was messy, his eyes swollen from lack of sleep. He must have sensed something was off because the second our eyes met, he froze for a moment. Then, as if pretending nothing was wrong, he mumbled, "Morning," and reached for the cereal box. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Morning." He poured the cereal, the clinking of flakes against the bowl painfully loud in the silence. I sipped my coffee just to keep my hands busy. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. It was like we were performing, two actors pretending to be mother and son, waiting for the director to yell cut. Finally, he asked without looking up, "You okay?" The question hit harder than I expected. There was concern in his voice, real concern, and that alone almost broke me. I took a slow breath. "No," I said honestly. "Not really." He paused mid-bite, spoon hanging in the air. "Why? Did something happen?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized how little I'd done that lately. His face still had that softness from when he was a boy, but the edges were harder now, shaped by things he shouldn't have had to carry. There were faint lines of worry around his eyes, too old for someone his age. "Ethan," I said quietly, "we need to talk about Mia." The spoon clattered into the bowl. His whole body went rigid. He blinked at me, as if trying to decide whether to lie or run. "What do you mean?" he stammered. "I saw the footage," I whispered. "The camera?" It was working again. For a heartbeat, silence filled the room, and then his face drained of color. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling. "Please." I raised a hand gently. "Don't. I'm not angry." My voice broke slightly on the last word. I need to understand." His eyes filled with panic, not the kind you feel when you're caught, but the kind that comes when you realize you've hurt someone you love. He looked at me like a cornered child, like he'd rather vanish than explain. "Please don't hate me," he whispered. That was all it took. My composure crumbled. I pushed the mug aside and leaned forward, my heart aching in my chest. "Ethan, I could never hate you, but I need you to tell me why you've been lying to me. Why did you take the money? Why her?" He opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't. Instead, his hands went to his face, pressing against his eyes like he was trying to stop the tears. But they came anyway, heavy and raw. The sound of his crying, real, broken crying, ripped through me. "Mom," he choked out, "I didn't mean to steal from you. I didn't know what else to do. I tried asking Dad, but he ignores my messages. Mia, she's been kicked out. His new wife hates her and she has nowhere to go. She's been staying with a friend, barely eating. I couldn't just not help." I felt my throat tighten. "Why didn't you tell me?" He shook his head, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Because I knew how you felt about them, about him, about that family. You always said he destroyed us. You said you didn't want to hear his name in this house. I thought if I told you, you'd tell me to stay away from her. But she's not him, Mom. She didn't do anything wrong. She just wanted someone to care." Tears blurred my vision, and I looked down at my hands to keep from falling apart. He was right. Every word of it. I had spent years spitting Daniel's name like poison, pretending that cutting him out meant cutting out the pain. I told myself I was protecting Ethan, when all I'd really done was build a wall so high he couldn't climb over it to reach me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." He looked up, confused, as if he didn't expect me to say that. "I thought if I made him disappear from our lives, I could protect you from him," I said, my voice shaking. "But I guess all I did was make you feel alone in a way I never meant to." For the first time in years, I saw it. That flicker of the boy he used to be. The one who used to hold my hand at night after a nightmare. The one who trusted me with everything. His face softened, his lips trembling. "You don't hate her?" he asked quietly. I stood up and walked around the table to him. He tensed for a second, unsure what I'd do, but then I wrapped my arms around him. He froze, then slowly melted into the hug, his arms wrapping around me in return. It felt unfamiliar at first, awkward, hesitant. But then it hit me just how long it had been since I'd held him like this. "I don't hate her," I said softly against his shoulder. "And I don't hate you. I just hate that you thought you couldn't tell me." He didn't say anything, just cried quietly. The kind of crying that comes when the weight of secrets finally breaks. I stroked his hair the way I used to when he was small, whispering, "It's okay. You did what you thought was right." After a while, we sat down together. The room felt lighter somehow, even though both of us were emotionally wrecked. The truth had cracked something open, and though it still hurt, there was air between us again. "What's going to happen to her?" I asked gently. He hesitated. "I don't know. She's scared. She said her mom threw her out after an argument with Dad. I tried calling him, but his numbers changed." Of course it had. Daniel had always been good at disappearing when things got hard. "Can you call her?" I asked. Ethan blinked, startled. "What?" "Call Mia," I said. "Tell her to come here." He stared at me, his eyes wide. "Mom, are you serious?" I nodded. "If she's his daughter, she's family. She's not the one who hurt us. She's just a child caught in the middle of someone else's mess, just like you were." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he pulled out his phone with shaking hands and texted her. I could see his fingers tremble as he typed. "She'll come," he said after a few minutes. "She's nearby." Those next 20 minutes were the longest of my life. Every sound, every tick of the clock made my pulse quicken. I paced the living room, straightened cushions that didn't need straightening, and checked my reflection in the mirror even though I didn't care how I looked. What would I even say to her? How do you greet the daughter of the man who broke your family? The girl you once swore you'd never acknowledge? The knock came soft and uncertain. Ethan jumped up instantly, his voice small. "That's her." He opened the door, and there she was. Mia looked smaller in person, fragile, almost like a bird trying to make itself invisible. Her clothes were clean but worn, her face pale from exhaustion. When her eyes met mine, she froze, unsure whether to step inside or run. "Hi," I said quietly. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Hello, ma'am." "Please," I said, forcing a gentle smile. "You can just call me Sarah." My name sounded strange, almost foreign, as if I hadn't used it in a long time. She hesitated at the threshold. Ethan gave her a small nod, and she stepped inside. We sat in the living room, the three of us surrounded by a silence that was thick with old ghosts. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I took a deep breath. "I know what's been going on," I began softly. "The money, the late nights, the lies. I saw everything." Mia's eyes went wide. She looked at Ethan, guilt flooding her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It wasn't his fault. He was just trying to help me." "I know," I said gently. "And I'm not angry. I just wish you hadn't both carried this burden alone." She bit her lip, eyes welling with tears. "I didn't think you'd want anything to do with me. Dad said you'd never forgive him, that you hated him, and by extension, me." The words sliced through me. "I don't hate you," I said, and my voice broke mid-sentence. "I hate what he did. I hate how he left us both to pick up his mess. But you're not him. You're just a kid trying to survive in a world that let you down." Mia's tears spilled over, and before I knew it, I was reaching across the table, taking her hand. Her fingers were cold and shaking. "I'm sorry for how I've felt all these years," I whispered. "You didn't deserve that." She looked up, her expression trembling between disbelief and relief. "You mean that?" I nodded. "I do." Ethan exhaled shakily beside her, his eyes glistening. "So, we're okay?" he asked softly. I turned to him, smiling through tears. "We're going to be okay. It's going to take time, but yes, we're okay." For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive, fragile, emotional, real, but alive. The three of us talked for hours. About Daniel, About the years he disappeared. About the lies he told to both families. About the pain that had quietly bound us together while we lived apart. Mia told me stories of the nights she and her mother waited for him to come home, the same way Ethan and I once had. She said he'd promised to take her to see Ethan one day, to make things right. But that day never came. As I listened, something inside me softened. I saw Daniel's eyes in her face, yes, but I also saw something he never had. Kindness, remorse, love. The kind of heart that wanted to heal, not destroy. By evening, the rain had stopped. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet. The three of us sat on the porch, quiet now, watching the light fade. Mia leaned her head against Ethan's shoulder. I rested mine against the doorframe, my chest full but calm. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was peace. That night, when I went back inside, I looked at the old nanny camera still blinking from the corner of the room. I walked over, unplugged it, and held it in my hand. For years, I'd used that little device to make myself feel safe, to watch over what I thought I couldn't control. But it had taken that same camera showing me the truth to remind me of something simple. Some things in life aren't meant to be recorded. They're meant to be lived. I set the camera down gently and whispered to myself, "No more watching, just living." And for the first time in years, I believed it.